I know who you are, but just for anybody that's watching this, who are you and what do you do?
My name is James McCormack, and I have a small business where I clean and press comic books for people.
So how did you get into that? Like how like did you clean some of your own books and you were just like, hey, people like what's the
Yeah,
story there?
truth be told, I actually started pressing comic books when I was maybe 10 or 12 years old, and by pressing, I mean that I would actually use my mother's like clothes iron just to press comic books. My father gave me some advice when he saw me doing that, and he said, "Well, he said if the iron's too hot, you're going to wind up melting the cover of the comic book." So he suggested a piece of wax paper. This was 45 years ago or whatever. So
Wow.
the wax paper technology wasn't quite what it is now. Back then the wax paper would kind of melt if you got a little too hot. So I kind of learned pretty quick the fine line between too much heat and not enough heat by how the wax paper would melt on my comic book.
So that's
So
45 years ago. How did you know? Because based on a lot of the books I see from 45 years ago, they're not in great condition, and people seem to not take care of them so much. How did you know 45 years ago to start taking care of your comic books?
yeah, I didn't really do it. I didn't really do it because I had any hindsight for the future or anything. I basically would do it because my friends would come over, and I was a big comic book collector, but most of my friends weren't. So my friends would come over and we'd read comic books, and some of them they would try to fold them in half or try to make a paper airplane out of one of
Be
them.
like, what are you doing?
Yeah, if it was one of the books that I liked, I would grab it from them. I'd say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And then so then I'd start looking at the comic books. That they'd have these creases and stuff that my friends would put in them. That was about the time my father got me my first subscription, comic book subscription. So back then they would mail the comic books literally folded in half.
Oh my God. Holy
So every time I'd get a book in the mail, it'd be folded in half, and there'd be that big crease going down the center. So yeah, so I pretty much owe it to my father for giving me my start.
So at what point did you realize that you could start like people needed this
Yeah,
service other than you?
in college, I was a member of some different groups, and we would like make our own T-shirts. And part of making a T-shirt is
The
using a
press.
T-shirt press, to press the logo on the
Yeah.
shirt or on T-shirt or whatever. Friend of mine started he had like some of these like old newspapers from World War II or whatever that
Oh.
like declaring the end of the war or whatever, like the headlines or whatever.
So we wanted to restore some newspapers.
Yeah, and I remember he actually started using T-shirt presses to press these old newspapers. It's a pretty easy correlation to go from pressing newspapers in a T-shirt press to pressing comic books.
So when was your revelation that like other people needed you to do this?
In the mid '80s, I had other friends that were comic book collectors, and they would start giving me their comic books to work on. I didn't really start doing it professionally until 10 years ago. I started charging people money to do it
Yeah. Well, I mean
because I want.
the internet opens it all up so you can
Oh
serve
my
the world.
gosh, and the internet was huge as far as all that goes. And then the first group I joined, which was Comic Book Lovers Group, I actually didn't join. I joined about a year ago.
Yeah.
And that kind of opened up a whole new avenue for me as far as being able to meet people and try to get my word or get the word out there that I was able to provide that service.
Yeah, generally when someone says, "Do you know any good pressers?" on most of the Facebook groups I'm on, your name comes up. I found out about you originally because there was someone, I forget exactly what the thing was, but somebody had a book that was really precious to them, and
Mm.
you quickly said like, "Hey, this looks like something that really means a lot to you. I'll do your book for free."
I really don't look at um, my abilities as a cleaner and presser. I really don't look at it from a revenue generating standpoint. I mean, I do it more for the just for the love of comic books. Every once in a while, somebody will come on one of the groups and they'll have questions about one of their comic books that they've had since they were a kid and it's in really bad shape and they might not know much about comic books. I try to go out of my way to offer to help them out or just to give them the opportunity to clean and press their comic book, at no charge, because I know how important it is that book might be to somebody from a sentimental standpoint. I like to pay things forward whenever I can.
What kind of things can a presser like you actually press out and clean? Like, what are some things that like you've got in a book and you're just like, oh man, this is a book I should get pressed and cleaned.
There's really not too many things that cannot be pressed out, as long as it's not what's considered or what's known as a color breaking defect.
Yeah, so
I
if you
mean,
don't have that white line in there
that
on the
white that
fold,
white line, yeah, that white line is what's going to be the color break, and
yeah,
so that particular little white line or that little anomaly might never be removed with a press, but pretty much everything else can be. Whether it's a crease or a tick or a fold,
yeah,
indentations can be removed. The key is to removing all of those things is to have the right setup. If you've got indentations on the cover of a book, like if somebody wrote on top of a book or traced on top of it, and there's a bunch
yeah.
of divots from a pen or whatever,
I've seen that a lot on older
remove re-
books.
removing those is going to be different than removing several ticks on the spine. As far as the setup, it's going to require different type of paper in between the pages, for example, or different piece of or special type of paper underneath the front cover, so that the indentations, you have more pressure to be able to remove the indentations. If you put a book in a press and you just give it an overall press, there might be some certain tiny defects that are actually too far down into the book that won't be removed
Mm.
by an overall press. A lot of times I'll just have to pull out a hand press or a hand close iron. If there's like really tiny ticks along the spine, you just kind of have to
Wow.
get down in there and just.
So you can even get out a spine tick.
You can take a spine tick that has color break and it's going to look awful, but the reason it looks awful is because you've got that indentation in the paper
Yeah,
along with the color break. Now if you can remove that indentation, you're still going to have the color break, but the footprint is going to be a lot less, so it's not going to look as bad. And
yeah,
that's obviously, especially if you're having a book graded, that's what they go. A lot of what they go by when they're grading a book is what, like, they'll first look at it and
how does
see
it
what kind of
present?
eye appeal it has, right? And that
Yeah.
and so anything you can do to minimize the actual footprint of that tick is going to count in your favor when it's being graded. So
So what's the biggest grade increase that you've ever seen after cracking a book?
a couple months ago, I cracked a Spider Verse, and it was a 9.2, and I cracked it and gave it just a nice little dry clean. Didn't need much as far as clean, but then I did a good press on it, and I brought it from a 9.2 to a 9.8.
Yeah, so that's really good. Wait,
That's
Was it Spider-Verse 1 or the Gwen Stacy 2?
It was the Gwen Stacy 2. Yeah, that
Very
was pretty impressive to go from a 9.2 to a 9.8.
Yeah, because the
I mean,
9.8 is almost like a lottery ticket when you get it back.
oh, and it's amazing the difference in value just between a 9.6 and a 9.8.
Yeah.
Literally, in some books, it's literally like twice as much or more.
It's kind of
Mm.
crazy to me that when you go to a comic book shop, that the book that you pull off the shelf isn't a near mint. Like the brand new book that you just bought, if you threw it right in a UPS or USPS packaging, sent it out with a Gemini mailer, that book might come back a 9.0 or a 9.2.
Right after the books come out of the assembly line, or off the assembly line, they might not be totally dry yet, for example. So
Wow.
you've got a combination of the ink drying, and then you've got the humidity conditions in the room, possibly, and all of that can lead to certain anomalies in the book as far as wavy pages.
Yeah, I get a
Uh,
lot of that on my new books because we have a lot of
yeah,
humidity around here. Is a 9.8 something that like a comic book collector can see at home? Like, oh, I think I got a 9.8 here, or is it really just a lottery ticket?
if you're sending in a new book, there's a huge price difference as far as from an investment standpoint. There's a huge price difference between a 9.8 and a 9.6.
Yeah,
And the biggest difference between a 9.8 and a 9.6, generally speaking, in a newer book, is going to be the fact that the cover might have some waviness to it.
yeah,
The only way to guarantee that those waves aren't going to be there is to have the books
pressed.
clean and pressed first. And I normally like to use the words clean and press in the same sentence, because generally speaking, it's not a good idea just to simply press a book without at least
Oh,
cleaning it, because and cleaning it might be a simple matter of just taking a microfiber towel and just wiping down the cover real nice.
because you can make it worse if there was a piece of.
I've got pictures on my Facebook group of small pieces of dust that have been on a book and have been pressed into the book, and it literally looks like a crater. It
Yeah,
looks like a crater on the moon
you make it
when you
worse.
when you zoom in on it. And typically something like those anomalies are removable with a second press. But the point is you don't want to have to do a second press if you don't need to. So you're better
Yeah,
off doing a quick clean of the book, a quick dry clean of the book before you press it. The easiest way to check a book before you send it in to be graded, as far as its condition, I've got some overhead lights that I purposely shine down here so that I can see. So I'll just take this book and I'll kind of get it in the light, so the light's reflecting off the cover, and you just kind of move the cover around in the light.
that's a good tip.
And with that light shining directly down on the cover, it will show every imperfection on the
So
covers.
it sounds like a
Uh,
really good tip that if you're gonna send something to CGC, if you're not gonna press it first, at least get like one of those clip-on desk lights or something real close
yeah,
to the
any,
book that you
any, any
can.
light any light source that could be a desk lamp or any type of light source that is kind of where you can kind of direct it downward and then
Right on
actually
it.
put the book under it is going to be beneficial, and will tell you everything you need to know about that book. Because if you just do a quick pass under the light and if you don't see anything major that stands out, chances are the pressers won't either when they do it, and that's kind of the rule of thumb.
I had some quick questions about the books I sent you.
You actually sent me a really good selection of books. You got ASM 361, obviously, which is the
I bought
and
that
I'm
for $5 on eBay
I'm
maybe seven
not
years ago.
I'm not ashamed to show my work. You got it's a beautiful book, obviously, First Appearance of Carnage,
Yeah, so
beautiful
that
book.
book, everyone I knew had that book. So for me, it was really surprising to see it actually climb to what it did. And so I looked at it and I was like, I don't know, this looks like it's in pretty good shape. I don't, should I
Yeah.
get it CGC? I don't know.
So this book is, a lot of people might have this book, but in a higher grade, they're harder to find, right?
Yeah.
Guys your age or whatever, when they bought this book right after it came out, you probably weren't thinking that it was going to be an overly valuable book back then. So you, you,
Oh
you
no.
might you might have read it a bunch of times because it was a really cool story,
Yeah, so you opened and bent it.
really cool art. You're opening it, bending it, whatever. So yeah, a 361 in high grade condition is pretty. I don't know if rare is the right word, but really, it's a really desirable
Hard to
book,
find.
right? From a monetary standpoint.
So when you were
Yeah,
looking at the 361, was it something that was like, I don't know, could it get graded high or
I really don't see anything wrong with it at all. I would think this is. It's easily a 9.6 from what
yeah.
I can see.
And it's such
And
that lottery ticket thing where it's like we're gonna send it in and like it'll be fun to see what
yeah,
happens. And that's like
and,
the
that, and that's
fun of it, I
another
guess.
reason why you would want to press a book like this. You could that could be the difference between it being a 9.6 and 9.8 is
Yeah.
just having it, spending $15 or whatever to have it pressed.
There were definitely issues with that book when I sent it to you as far as like maybe little cover, those little dents in your cover that you get or like I cannot see that book possibly being a 9.8 without getting it pressed. And I think there was a Sandman #1 in there that was something that like I don't know. I think I bought that for like it could might have been like $10 or something when it was in
Yeah,
like
and
a
your
back issue rack.
Transformers book is show your beautiful Transformers book. Obviously, this is a real popular issue for a variety of reasons. As far as the spec book and all that. So there's a few small ticks on the spine of this one, but certainly nothing out of the ordinary. And that's a real. This is probably a 9.4. You
Wow.
know, before the press, it might have been a 9.2, or whatever. But so a 0.2 difference after a press, some people might think that's not that big of a deal, but comic books now are basically investments, right? It's and so if you look at this Sandman issue that of yours, and this is an absolutely beautiful book too. I can see a couple small anomalies on the spine, but again, nothing major. Which is so, let's say this is a 9-4, for example. And going back to the Transformers book as well, if both of these, the Sandman and the Transformers books, if these are both, let's say these were both 9-2s, and then with the press, the press might have gotten them both up to a 9-4, for example.
Yeah.
That 0.2 difference, you're talking about, you know, generally speaking, that could be like a 50 or $60 bump, right? As far as value.
Yeah. And that's currently right now.
A $15 press, if that's going to add $75 in value to your book, then it's a good investment moving
Then why
forward,
not?
right?
It's a no-brainer.
And not only that, but then once it is clean and press, if you have it slabbed and graded, then it's going to be behind that slab for the next 30 or 40 years,
Yeah.
and it's always
Staying.
it's always it's always going to be a 9-4, and so it's always going to have a certain amount of value as a 9-4.
One of the questions I see asked the most is, should I press my book before sending it to CGC? And it sounds like that answer is a resounding yes. Press and clean your book before sending it to go get graded. Pretty
um,
much 9 10
yeah,
times out of 10.
I would imagine that's almost and this takes us back to what we were talking about earlier with the newer books that might look perfect until
Yeah.
you put them under a light and you see the waves. I mean, just using that scenario or that line of thinking alone would dictate that any book that is sent in for grading should be cleaned and pressed for optimum results.
Well, I've held you here for a long time, so thank you so much for taking your time out to talk to me today. This is really awesome.
Calvin, anytime.